Atlanta has seen drama before, but nothing like this. What started as a heated argument spiraled into chaos when young Jock's rage turned violent, leaving Kirk Frost fighting for his life and the entire cast in shock. Sirens blared, cameras rolled, and fans watched in disbelief as Rashida collapsed in tears outside the hospital, begging for answers. Secrets, betrayal, and revenge all collide in the most shocking moment in love and hip-hop, Atlanta history. And one split-second decision will change every relationship forever. This isn't just drama. This is a line that should never have been crossed. The night that was supposed to end with champagne and celebration instead turned into one of the darkest moments in love and hip-hop. Atlanta history. Under the glowing lights of Club Eclipse, cameras rolled, music thundered, and cast members laughed over expensive bottles, but beneath the glitter, an old grudge was ready to erupt. For weeks, tension had been building between young Jock and Kirk Frost. What started as whispers of betrayal had grown into an open wound. Jock believed Kirk had betrayed him, cutting him out of a lucrative deal that the two had been working on together. Kirk, on the other hand, brushed off the accusations as business decisions. But in Atlanta, business and betrayal often share the same name. The moment Jock stepped into the club that night, the energy shifted. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a storm behind his eyes. Every step he took toward the VIP section was deliberate, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He had replayed the conversation he was about to have 100 times in his head. But the closer he got to Kirk, the less he felt like talking. Kirk was at the center of the room, surrounded by friends and castmates, laughing like nothing was wrong. Rashida stood nearby, sipping champagne, unaware that her night and her life was about to change. At 11:42 p.m., Jock reached the velvet ropes of the VIP section. The security guard stepped aside. The music seemed too quiet. Every camera lens turned toward him. "Kirk," he called out, his voice slicing through the music. "We need to talk." Kirk looked up, smiling at first, thinking Jock was joking. But when he saw the look in his eyes, the smile faded. "Man, not tonight," Kirk said. "Let's just enjoy the party." But Jock wasn't there to enjoy anything. "No," he snapped. "We're doing this now." The two men stood face to face, the crowd instinctively pulling back. Jock's words came fast, laced with anger. He accused Kirk of betrayal, of taking their joint business deal and secretly cutting him out, signing a new contract behind his back. Kirk denied it, insisting everything was above board. But the more he spoke, the more Jock's rage boiled. "Business is business," Kirk said coolly, raising his glass. "You should have read the paperwork." That was the breaking point. The glass slipped from Jock's hand and shattered on the floor. The next second, he was in Kirk's face, yelling, shoving, his anger spilling into the room like gasoline. Kirk pushed back, but Jock had already lost control. A single punch thrown hard and fast connected with Kirk's jaw. The impact sent him crashing backward into a table. Bottles shattered, people screamed, and chaos erupted. Kirk hit the ground hard. For a moment, he didn't move. The room froze. Then someone shouted, "Call 911." Rashida's glass fell from her hand as she ran toward him. Kirk's body was motionless, blood pooling beneath his head from a gash near his temple. Security swarmed the scene, pulling Jock away, but he was still shouting, anger far from spent. "You don't mess with my money." He roared as guards restrained him. "You don't betray me like that." The music had stopped completely. The only sounds were Rashida's cries and the frantic instructions of paramedics as they rushed in minutes later. They stabilized Kirk on the floor, placing a neck brace around him before carefully lifting him onto a stretcher. Cameras captured every second, the flashing lights, the terrified faces, Rashida clutching his hand as he was wheeled out. Outside, the street was lined with flashing red and blue lights. Paparazzi and fans who had been waiting outside the club now crowded closer, snapping photos as the ambulance doors slammed shut. Rashida climbed in beside her husband, still trembling, her tears soaking through her dress. Inside the ambulance, Kirk's condition remained uncertain. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow, his pulse weak. Rashida kept talking to him, begging him to stay awake, back at the club. Police officers arrived to arrest Jock. His once furious demeanor had dissolved into a mixture of regret and disbelief, as officers read him his rights and escorted him out in handcuffs. Reporters shouted questions, fans screamed his name, and cast members watched. According to insiders, it wasn't just about money. The deal Kirk had allegedly cut Jock out of was worth millions, but there was more betrayal layered on betrayal. Some sources claimed Kirk had been talking behind Jock's back, trying to poach artists from a label they'd been building together. Others hinted at personal issues, deep-rooted resentment that had been simmering for years. Whatever the truth, it was clear this fight had been brewing long before that night. Back at the hospital, Rashida's emotional state was deteriorating. The strong, composed woman fans had come to know looked broken as she sat by her husband's bedside, clutching his hand and whispering prayers. Her tears fell silently, landing on the crisp white sheets as she begged him to wake up. Hours passed. Then movement. Kirk's fingers twitched. His eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. "Kirk," Rashida whispered, leaning over him. "Baby, can you hear me?" His voice was weak and slurred. "What happened?" Tears streamed down her face. "You're in the hospital, Jock. He attacked you." Kirk's brow furrowed as fragments of the night returned. The party, the argument, the punch, the floor, and then nothing. "Where is he?" Kirk rasped. "Jail," Rashida replied, her voice trembling with both relief and rage. "Where he belongs." Kirk's condition was still fragile, but the fact that he was awake was a huge step forward. Doctors assured Rashida that with rest and time, he would recover, though they couldn't rule out potential long-term complications. For now, the focus was on healing. But outside those hospital walls, the world was spiraling. Protesters gathered outside the courthouse demanding justice. Jock's lawyers issued statements insisting the attack had been a heat-of-the-moment mistake. Fans debated fiercely online, with some defending Jock as a man who had been betrayed and pushed too far, while others condemned him as a violent aggressor who had crossed a line no one could justify. The network behind Love and Hip Hop, Atlanta, was in crisis mode. Executives held emergency meetings to discuss the show's future. Sponsors threatened to pull out. Some insiders suggested shelving the season entirely, fearing the backlash would destroy the franchise. Others argued the scandal, as disturbing as it was, had generated record-breaking interest and that the show's ratings could skyrocket once the footage aired. As Kirk recovered, Rashida's heartbreak turned to anger. This wasn't just a personal attack, it was a public humiliation. Her husband's name was being dragged through the headlines, their marriage dissected by strangers, and their family's reputation questioned by millions. She vowed that Jock would face consequences no matter how long it took. 2 days later, Jock posted bail and walked out of the Fulton County Jail with cameras flashing in his face. He didn't speak. He didn't wave. He kept his head down and got into a waiting SUV. But the silence spoke volumes. The once loud, always charismatic Jock now looked like a man who understood the gravity of what he'd done. Kirk, still recovering, released a brief statement from the hospital, thanking fans for their support and asking for privacy. But the tension was far from over. Rumors swirled that Rashida was preparing to file a civil lawsuit seeking millions in damages. Producers hinted that the next reunion special would feature the most intense confrontation in reality TV history. And behind the scenes, old alliances were shifting as cast members chose sides. What had begun as a business dispute had now become something much bigger, a public spectacle, a legal battle, and a turning point that would redefine the lives of everyone involved. Kirk's road to recovery would be long and uncertain. Jock's career hung in the balance, and Rashida, once the show's emotional anchor, is now its most determined force for justice. But even as the dust began to settle, one thing was clear: the storm was far from over. The attack at Club Eclipse was not the end of the story, it was just the beginning, and the reckoning that followed would shake Atlanta's hip-hop scene to its core. The days that followed the attack were a blur of flashing cameras, breaking news alerts, and court documents. What had begun as a shocking altercation between two reality TV stars was now a full-blown legal crisis. And the fallout was only growing. Kirk Frost was recovering slowly, but each step was painful. He remained under observation for over a week, struggling with dizziness, blurred vision, and severe headaches, the lingering symptoms of a concussion and trauma. Though he was able to walk and talk again, doctors warned that the healing process could take months. The visible bruises on his face and the bandages on his head served as constant reminders of the violence he had endured. Rashida never left his side. She had transformed from a devastated wife into a woman on a mission. Her focus had shifted from fear to fury. The tears that once fell in hospital corridors were replaced by determination. She vowed that Jock would not only answer for what he'd done, but pay for every ounce of pain he had caused. The legal wheels were already turning. Kirk's legal team prepared a civil lawsuit seeking millions in damages for medical expenses, emotional distress, and loss of income. They argued that Jock's assault had not only endangered Kirk's life, but also jeopardized his future in entertainment. And they had a mountain of evidence to support their case. Videos from multiple angles, eyewitness testimonies, and even Jock's own words shouted during the fight. Meanwhile, prosecutors were pushing forward with criminal charges: aggravated assault with intent to cause bodily harm, a felony charge that could carry up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Jock's legal team argued that the attack was a momentary lapse of judgment fueled by anger and betrayal. But prosecutors countered that this was a deliberate act of violence, one that had nearly cost a man his life. As the legal battle loomed, public opinion remained deeply divided. Supporters of Kirk flooded social media with messages of solidarity, calling for justice and urging the network to fire Jock immediately. Others, however, defended Jock, claiming that Kirk's alleged betrayal had provoked the attack. The debate raged across platforms, with fans dissecting every detail of the incident and speculating about what would happen next. Through it all, Rashida remained silent until the press conference, standing on the steps of the courthouse. Dressed in black and wearing dark sunglasses, she faced the flashing cameras and shouted questions with the calm intensity of someone who had been through hell and refused to break. "My husband is lucky to be alive," she said, her voice steady. This was not an argument. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an act of violence, and there will be consequences. We are pursuing justice to the fullest extent of the law for Kirk, for our family, and for everyone who thinks they can solve their problems with their fists. The statement sent shockwaves through the entertainment industry. It was no longer just a scandal, it was a mission. Rashida's words framed the incident as bigger than two men fighting. This was about accountability, responsibility, and setting a precedent in a world where violence too often went unchecked. Jock, on the other hand, stayed mostly silent. His lawyers advised him to avoid public statements, fearing that anything he said could be used against him. But silence couldn't protect his career. Sponsors began pulling deals. Bookings were canceled. Venues distanced themselves from his name. His once lucrative brand was collapsing under the weight of public backlash. Behind the scenes, producers of Love and Hip Hop Atlanta faced a crisis of their own. Ratings had skyrocketed after the incident, but the show's reputation was on the line. Could they keep Jock on the cast without appearing to condone violence? Could they risk losing Kirk and Rashida, two of the show's biggest stars, if they didn't act? Discussions grew heated and rumors swirled that major changes were coming. As the court date approached, the tension between the two camps intensified. Rashida and Kirk focused on building their case, determined to make an example of Jock. Jock's team scrambled to negotiate a plea deal, hoping to avoid a lengthy prison sentence. Mediation meetings were proposed, but they ended quickly. Rashida refused to entertain anything less than full accountability in private moments. Kirk wrestled with complex emotions. He was angry, furious, even. As the trial date neared, a final blow landed. A leaked court document revealed that prosecutors were considering additional charges: intimidation after reports surfaced that Someone connected to Jock had tried to contact witnesses. To clear up the story, the news spread like wildfire, further tarnishing his image and strengthening the case against him. The stage was now set for one of the most dramatic showdowns in reality TV history, a courtroom battle that would decide not just Jock's fate, but the future of the franchise, the careers of everyone involved, and the fragile friendships that had held the cast together for years. The lines had been drawn. On one side stood Kirk and Rashida, determined, united, and unwilling to back down. On the other, Jock, disgraced, desperate, and fighting to salvage what was left of his life and career. And in the middle, an entire industry watched, waiting for the verdict that could change everything. The question was no longer who was right or who was wrong. It was who would survive the storm that had been unleashed, and what would be left of their lives when it was over. The day of the trial arrived like a thunderstorm over Atlanta, dark, tense, and charged with anticipation. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, cameras pointed at every arriving car, and fans gathered behind barricades, chanting and holding signs. Some were there for Kirk and Rashida, calling for justice. Others had come to support Jock, insisting that he had simply made a mistake. But for everyone watching, one thing was clear. This was not just a court case. It was the climax of one of the most explosive scandals the city had ever seen. Kirk arrived first, wearing a tailored black suit, his face still showing faint scars from the attack. Rashida was by his side, her hand clasped tightly in his, her eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. They walked past the cameras without a word, their silence more powerful than any statement could have been. Minutes later, Jock stepped out of a black SUV, flanked by his legal team. The swagger that had once defined him was gone. His eyes were heavy, his shoulders tense, and the weight of the possible 20-year sentence seemed to press down on him with every step. The moment his face appeared, the crowd erupted, some booing, others shouting words of encouragement. Jock didn't react. He kept walking. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was electric. The gallery was packed with journalists, producers, and castmates. Security was tight. Even the judge's entrance felt heavier than usual. It's as if everyone understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold. The prosecution opened with a brutal account of the night of the attack. They played video footage from multiple angles, Jock storming across the dance floor, shouting, shoving, and then landing the devastating punch that sent Kirk crashing to the ground. The room watched in silence as paramedics rushed in and Rashida screamed for help. Even Jock kept his head down as the evidence replayed his actions in unforgiving detail. This was no accident. The prosecutor declared, this was a deliberate act of violence fueled by anger, jealousy, and greed. The defendant knew exactly what he was doing, and his actions nearly killed a man. The defense countered with a different story. They painted Jock as a man who had been deeply betrayed, a friend pushed past his breaking point by deception and disrespect. They argued that he had not intended to cause serious harm, that the punch was a heat-of-the-moment reaction, not a calculated assault. They called character witnesses to testify to Jock's history of kindness, generosity, and loyalty. But the prosecution dismantled their arguments one by one, pointing to the evidence of premeditation, angry texts sent before the party, messages where Jock promised to confront Kirk face to dash face. Then came the testimonies. Witness after witness took the stand. Party guests, security staff, even members of the production crew, all told this same story. Jock had approached Kirk in anger, ignored attempts to de-escalate, and thrown the first punch. Each testimony tightened the noose around his defense. But the most powerful moment came when Rashida took the stand. Dressed in black and holding back tears, she spoke not just as Kirk's wife, but as the woman who had watched the man she loved nearly die on a nightclub floor. I thought I was watching him die, she said quietly, the courtroom silent. I thought that was the last time I'd ever see him alive. This wasn't just a fight. It was violence, and it's changed our lives forever. Her words landed like a hammer blow. Even Jock couldn't meet her eyes. Kirk testified next. He described the attack, the pain, the hospital stay, and the months of physical and emotional recovery. His voice trembled as he described the nightmares, the anxiety, and the fear that now followed him into every room. "I trusted him," Kirk said. "We've built something together." And he threw it away in one moment of anger. When it was Jock's turn to testify, the courtroom held its breath. He took the stand, visibly shaken, his voice breaking as he admitted to the attack. But he stopped short of taking full responsibility. "I lost my temper," he said. "I felt betrayed. I wasn't trying to kill him. I just snapped." The prosecution seized on his words. "You weren't trying to kill him, but you almost did," they shot back. "And that's why you're here." The trial stretched on for days, each session peeling back new layers of betrayal, anger, and regret. The courtroom became a stage for one of the most dramatic confrontations reality television had ever fueled. By the final day, the entire city was watching, waiting, and speculating about the verdict. When closing arguments ended, the jury was sent to deliberate. Hours passed. Reporters refreshed their feeds every minute. Fans outside chanted for justice. Inside, Kirk and Rashida sat side by side, hands entwined, barely breathing. Jock stared at the table, his future dangling by a thread. Finally, after nearly 7 hours, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood on the charge of aggravated assault. He began, "We, the jury, find the defendant." The pause stretched for eternity. Even the air seemed to stop moving. "Guilty." A gasp rippled through the room. Jock's head dropped. Rashida gripped Kirk's hand tighter, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. The judge thanked the jury and set a date for sentencing. Jock was handcuffed and led from the courtroom as photographers outside scrambled to capture the moment. The verdict sent shockwaves across the entertainment industry. Headlines screamed, "Young Jock found guilty of assaulting Kirk Frost faces up to 20 years. Social media erupted. Some celebrated the verdict as justice served. Others mourned the fall of a once beloved figure. The Love and Hip Hop cast was divided, with some members cutting ties with Jock entirely, while others urged forgiveness. But inside Kirk and Rashida's home, the verdict brought something the couple hadn't felt in months: peace. It didn't erase the trauma or undo the damage, but it gave them a sense of closure. They had fought for justice and won. Still, the scars, both physical and emotional, would take longer to heal. Kirk's recovery continued slowly. Some days were better than others. The headaches persisted and the anxiety lingered. Rashida had moments when the memory of that night would flood back without warning, leaving her shaking. Yet through it all, they remained united. Their marriage, tested by betrayal, violence, and fear, emerged stronger than ever. And as they looked toward the future, one truth remained clear: nothing would ever be the same again. The show, the friendships, the business, all of it had been forever altered by one night. One punch, one moment of uncontrolled rage. And as Jock awaited sentencing, the world waited too, to see what justice would ultimately mean for the man who had gone from reality star to convicted felon in front of millions. The courthouse was silent when young Jock returned for sentencing. Weeks had passed since the guilty verdict, yet the tension in the air felt as heavy as ever. The world had watched every second of the trial, every tear that fell from Rashida's eyes. The prosecutor spoke first, urging the court to impose a harsh sentence. This wasn't just a fight, she argued. It was a public act of violence that nearly cost a man his life and set a dangerous example for millions of viewers watching at home. Mr. Robinson's actions were reckless, deliberate, and deserving of the maximum penalty. Jock's attorney pleaded for leniency. "My client has shown remorse," he said. "He has cooperated fully, has no prior violent record, and has taken steps to make amends. We ask the court to consider his contributions to the community and his potential for rehabilitation." Then the judge invited Kirk to speak. He rose slowly, supported by Rashida, and approached the podium. The courtroom fell utterly silent. "I should hate you," Kirk said, his voice steady but heavy with emotion. "I should wish you the worst. But the truth is, I don't. I just wish you had stopped to think before you acted. You didn't just hurt me, you hurt my wife, my kids, my family. You took something from me that I can never get back, my sense of safety. I hope you use whatever time you're given to think about that." Rashida followed, her voice trembling but firm. "I've watched my husband struggle to walk. I've seen him wake up screaming from nightmares. And I've cried more tears than I ever thought I could. You broke something in us, Jock, but you didn't destroy us. And I pray you learn from this, because no one should ever have to go through what we went through." Finally, it was Jock's turn. He stood, taking a deep breath before speaking. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not because I got caught. Not because of the cameras or the headlines. I'm sorry because I hurt someone I once called a brother. I let anger control me, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." The judge listened without reaction. Then, after a long pause, he delivered the sentence. "On the charge of aggravated assault, I hereby sentence you to 8 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 4. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $2.5 million in damages to Mr. Frost and attend mandatory anger management and rehabilitation programs." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, cries, even shouts. Jock closed his eyes as the reality of his fate sank in. He turned briefly toward Kirk and Rashida, his lips forming silent words, "I'm sorry," before officers placed him in handcuffs and led him away, outside. The media storm exploded once again. Headlines screamed the news.